out to y'all. It's great to be with y'all. I love your part of our world, of our country, and try and get out there as much as possible. This seems to be the week. I've been speaking to Contra Costa, like their Midrashah program, and another group that has a connection there. Um, some educators out there. So I've always loved that name, Contra Costa. So when I saw y'all were right near there, it's great to be with y'all. And I am over in Atlanta, so it's Sunday afternoon here, and a busy political time over here in this little corner of this little new blue part of the country. We are excited. As Atlantans will tell you oftentimes that they live in Atlanta, they don't mention they live in Georgia. But so we're seeing quite an uh, interesting energy, I will say, over here in the political world. So let me just start. We're talking about uncomfortable conversations, and I do want to make sure that the title is not how to make these conversations comfortable. These conversations are not going to ever be comfortable, because if conversations to create change are comfortable, are you really on the point that needs to be changed? Um, but this is really more about how to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And much of my life, I was telling the rabbi earlier how I got into the virtual talks. Um, Much of my life, I have only discovered how it happened in hindsight. I'm not really one of those that's been able to totally see it in advance, or tell you, really, I planned this out. And it was, as the rabbi said, I've been doing trips for about 17 years now. Um, my business, my nonprofit business, started as a summer trip, taking teenagers on a 36-day trip around America, where they were engaging in history, politics, and activism by talking to all sides of political issues, um, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-guns, pro-gun control. And that morphed into, during the academic year, I started taking groups of middle school all the way up to empty nesters on civil rights trips here in the American South. And of course, on March 8th, we got off the bus off of a civil rights trip and have never been back on the bus yet this year. And the Atlanta rabbis called me right after George Floyd's murder. And they asked if I could talk to them about how to have conversations about race in their congregations. It used to be that Israel was really the issue that would start to separate the community, and some rabbis won't have a talk about Israel because of the conflict. And now is really about race and American politics. And one of the rabbis said to me, they're like, you've made a career out of engaging, seeking out uncomfortable conversations. I was like, you know what? You're right. I didn't even think about that. Let's do it. So I talked to them and then really enjoyed it. And so now this is what I've been doing in light of leading the trips. And I've really enjoyed it. And thinking back again, how did I get to the idea that we need to have uncomfortable conversations? Once again, in hindsight, um, it's really, I could pinpoint the exact date. It would be December 21st, 1988. I was a senior at Syracuse University, and it was the night before my 21st birthday. And I, being a good Jewish boy, know that we begin our celebrations of holidays the night before. So that night, my friends were going to take me out to start celebrating my 21st birthday, which would be the next day. But up in Syracuse, upstate New York, you don't want to be outside that much. So we started by going to a basketball game, college basketball game. And on the way, we heard about a plane crash over in Europe, but we were American college students. We weren't thinking that much about it. But at halftime of the game, we started to hear that the plane may have been brought down due to terrorist activity. We also started to think that some of our friends were coming home from studying abroad right around this time, including my junior year roommate, including an old girlfriend, people from your part of the world, people that I followed the Grateful Dead with, a band from your neck of the woods. And we would see them all around the Northeast. And so on the way out that night from the basketball game, we decided to stop by my apartment first, and we watched the 11 o'clock news. And that's where we heard about the fate of Pan Am Flight 103. that was brought down over Lockerbie, Scotland, due to a Libyan terrorist placing a bomb on the plane, killing everybody on board, including, we found out, 38 Syracuse students, including my junior year roommate and the old girlfriend and the Grateful Dead touring friends. And that night, I got a gift for my 21st birthday that still plays out today. I realized that I am connected to people and events that I don't even know about. Because really, the tensions between America and Libya started over events that happened back when I was 13 and 14, and really not paying attention to what was going on in the world around me. And I started to think that night, what would have happened had the man who placed the bomb on the plane, what if he had spent his energy, instead of using it and channeling it through fear and hate, what if he had gotten to know the people on the plane? Could he have done such damage? And this idea is biblical. It's not new. In fact, our freedom story, our Passover narrative, starts with a line in the Torah: there came a new Pharaoh upon the land who did not know from Joseph, who did not know that the Jews and the Pharaohs had a connection there. And so when this new Pharaoh saw how numerous our people were becoming, he did something very human. He acted out of fear, and he enslaved our people. And this begins our whole Passover story. But that kind of deep thinking that I was having didn't last long, because I was also graduating college. I need to figure out what I was doing. Now, I was, at the time, I was a big summer camp person. Went to camp up in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts, and I loved it. I loved being a camper, and what I really loved was being a camp counselor. And I knew that if I could do that job, camp counselor, full time, I would do it. And somebody said, that's a synagogue youth director. So while I was at Syracuse, I got a job as a synagogue youth director there. And all my camp friends and I decided we would reunite in Washington, D.C. and live there after college. And it just so happened I was able to get a job as a synagogue youth director in Washington, D.C. And so I got involved with all that, planning the sporting events, the overnights, and all that. But slowly, I started to realize that this need to teach about connection started popping up in the programming. And there was sort of an unstated agreement between myself and my youth group members that if they wanted the free time of the overnights, the whitewater rafting on the camping trips, they had to give me what I wanted, which was 20 to 30 minutes to have a discussion about events and their connection to it. And then I took it up a notch, where I started to take the youth group on a trip every year to a different city, where we would connect them to the history and the culture and the sites of that city. And then, as I told you earlier, in 2003, I took it up the next notch to the summer trip. Now, why uncomfortable conversations? It's because I don't think any change is going to come from comfort. Only through discomfort is change going to come. Why would you look to be changing something if you're comfortable? And by the way, this idea of having the uncomfortable conversations to create change or understanding, it's a very Jewish concept too. One of our fundamental documents, the Talmud, is really just a recording of arguments, winning arguments and losing arguments, because the organizers of the Talmud understood that what was winning the debate one day might not be winning a week from then, 5 years from then, 500 years, 1,000 years later. So why not record it all? That's how important debates and arguments are. And that's our fundamental document. And in there is a story that I really love of two rabbis, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And they were the Fox News and MSNBC of their day. They would just go at it. They would have blowout arguments, so much so that after one of them, Reish Lakish dies. And the students of these two rabbis saw how distraught Rabbi Yochanan was. And so one of the students decided to step up and take Reish Lakish's place. But his strategy was he was just going to agree with Rabbi Yochanan. And this outraged Rabbi Yochanan. He said to the student, how dare you think that you can replace such a man as Reish Lakish by just agreeing with me? Do you not understand how important it is to push back, how important it is to challenge me? And what these two rabbis understood was you can debate and argue without losing the human connection to each other. That you can have a human connection, a friendship, and still disagree. That's how important they felt that the disagreements were. And in fact, many of the customs and religious laws that we follow today come out of those discussions and debates. You know, one way to we think to make these connections, you got to go deep and high level. And I just want to start off by saying, just find a way in to make the connection. Perhaps the person is wearing a color t-shirt that you like, or has a music band on there that you like, or a sports team, or has art hanging behind them that you like and find interesting. And you can start talking there and make the connection. You know, for example, on our summer trip, so I told you, we meet with all sides of issues. And one of the sides we talk about is marriage equality. And we meet with an LGBT synagogue in Dallas, and they tell us their side of the debate, pro marriage equality. But then we meet with a gentleman, his name is Jim, and Jim has worked with Focus on the Family, the religious right in America, out of Colorado Springs. And he has fought politically against marriage equality in the Colorado level, but also on the national level. And Jim comes and presents his views. But Jim understands that this is a generational issue. That the kids on the right on our group who self identify as Republican or conservative, I would say 99% of them have no problem with marriage equality. It is a generational issue. The younger generation does not have a problem with it. But Jim continues to talk to the group. And after one summer, after one of the discussions, one of the participants raised her hand and said, Jim, there is nothing I agree with you about. In fact, there's really nothing about you I like. And Jim said, really? There's nothing about me you like? And she looked him up and down. She said, well, I like your shoes. And Jim said, okay, what does that mean if you like my shoes? And she said, well, what it means to me is I disagree with you politically completely, but you have taste in shoes. And Jim said, okay, let's start a connection there. Let's start talking about that. Because can I be completely horrible? She said, no, your ideas are, but your fashion is not. And so Jim wanted to start there. And the reason I tell that story is oftentimes to make connections and to have conversations that create change, we think we got to talk high level. Like if you want to talk about race in America, you don't have to start by talking to Klansmen, though I know somebody who did. Right now, can you see the pictures, Rabbi? Okay, great. I never trust my technical ability. This man here, this black man here, his name is Daryl Davis, and he's a blues musician out of Washington, D.C. And he meets with my groups too because he has accidentally befriended Klansmen. How, as a black man, you accidentally befriend Klansmen, I have no idea. But Daryl has. And Daryl wants to answer the fundamental question, how can you hate me if you don't even know me? How can you hate me if you don't even know me? So they start to have discussions, talk about uncomfortable conversations. These are people who have been told that Daryl is the other, the less than, the not to be given respect or equality to. But they start to talk. And I told you that Daryl is a musician. And Daryl has played with some of the architects of rock and roll, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis's band, the Rolling Stones. So they can start talking about music. But then they start talking about sports. Then they start talking about their neighborhoods and where they're from and things like that. And slowly but surely, the Klansmen start to realize the disconnect from how they've been brought up believing and what's happening right in front of them. They've been taught that Daryl is the enemy, the less than, the other, but yet they like him. So all of a sudden, can they totally hate black people if they like this black man? And what ends up happening is that disconnect becomes so large that many of them end up leaving the Klan. And they give Daryl their robes and hoods. And these are some leaders here. This is the Imperial Wizard robe. This is the Grand Dragon robe. These are leaderships of the Klan. To date, over 200 people have left the Klan, including neo-Nazis, because they've had basic conversations with Daryl. That's how powerful it can be when we start talking to people who don't look like us, think like us, pray like us, love like us, and last week, vote like us. That's what can happen, that kind of change. And so we talk to the teenagers, and I realize I'm talking about a summer trip where we're educating teenagers, but um, many of these tools and strategies apply very well to adults. So I'm just going to keep teaching them. The first 5 days of the summer trip are civil rights, Atlanta through Little Rock, Arkansas. On the first Friday morning of the trip, the teenagers are dealing with the issue of abortion by meeting with Pro Life Texas, the executive director of Pro Life Texas. Now, the first thing I will say and advise when we are engaging in uncomfortable conversations is to educate yourself. So we start anytime we are going to talk about an issue, we have what we call a framing discussion, where we will sit and go over the vocabulary of an issue, but also the pros and cons, because nobody, especially adults, like to show up to a conversation not knowing what's going to happen. But then we have a really important talk. We start talking about what is success in an uncomfortable conversation. Because unfortunately, in America today, we have set up the paradigm to be for me to be right, you have to be wrong. It's binary. I'm right, you're wrong. And that is success. And I've got to make you understand you're wrong, and you have to drop your beliefs. So what we try and do with the teenagers is talk about, can we shift the paradigm to be maybe success is that I can start to understand where you are coming from without having to buy it. Because also in America, we think that if we start to understand, we're starting to accept or condone. And that's not true. It's just, can I see where you're coming from in a conversation? Because really, think about it for a second. One of three things is going to happen when you engage in an uncomfortable conversation. One is, I'm going to hear your point of view, and I'm going to think, you know what? You are right, and it's time for me to change what I think. Number two, some of what you're saying makes sense, and I'm going to tweak what I'm thinking here. Or number three, I've heard you. I'm just not buying it right now, and I'm going to double down on what I'm thinking. All you're basically doing is taking your ideas and beliefs out for a test drive. Hardly any of us would buy a car without test driving it. Why would we hold on to beliefs and ideas without test driving it? Once again, it does not mean you have to change your ideas. It's just, can I see where the other person's coming from? Because in all honesty, in that conversation with Pro Life Texas, there's really nothing that a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old is going to say, really nothing that any of us are going to say to the executive director of Pro Life Texas, where he's going to be like, you know what? You are right. Let's go get my wife and let's go to a clinic. It's just not going to happen. So if you're expecting that to be success, then you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for a long afternoon. So why not have it be that perhaps I can understand where they are coming from? And so I want to share 6 strategic points on engaging in an uncomfortable conversation. I'm going to go back to pictures for this. And like in an airplane, when they tell you that if the oxygen masks fall down, take care of yourself first, then others, these steps and tools and strategies are really for you to get into and out of an uncomfortable conversation. So how to have difficult conversations. Step 1, stay calm. You got to learn how to breathe, especially when the other person is talking. You know, we've all know the feeling when you start to get frustrated or angry at somebody, your head starts to get fuzzy, your chest starts to constrict a little bit. And think about the words we use to describe this. I lost my head in that conversation, or that wasn't me in the conversation. That was an out of body experience. Well, one of the ways you keep your head about you is to breathe. Step 2, present your views and have a point of view, and allow the person you are addressing to present theirs. Right? This is not a monologue. It's going to be a conversation. Step 3, question and push back on the other person's ideas and points, not on them personally. Nobody likes to be attacked. Nobody likes to be assaulted here verbally. But also, I would add, if you are having to attack the person personally, you're probably not winning the debate or argument. You might not have good enough points to make. So keep it about the ideas and points. Step 4, reflect back on and use their statements and frame of reference in your pushback so that they can relate. What I'm really meaning is if they tell a story or they have a certain term they use, if you reflect back, it's active listening. If you just reflect back on the words they're using or the story they've shared, use that as an example to make your point, then you know they can relate to it. Step 5, oops, let me go back. Step 5, everything doesn't have to end in agreement. You can keep it civil yet uncomfortable. And that's really important. It goes back to what is success. Once again, success is not necessarily going to be that we end in agreement or that that person changes their mind. You know, former First Lady Michelle Obama made famous the saying, when they go low, we go high. And then she amended it at the recent Democratic convention when she said, going high, taking the high road, does not mean not pushing back, right? All too often in America, we think that disagreeing can be rude. Disagreeing is actually fundamental to who we are as Jews and as Americans. How you disagree can be rude, but disagreeing is not rude. It's how a democracy thrives here, is having debate and conversation. Step 6, and lastly, calibrate success as being that the person you are speaking with has heard you and you have heard them, not necessarily in that order. Not necessarily that you are in agreement. I don't know where I'm reading my own stuff. I don't know where I came up with those words. Calibrate success as being that the person you are speaking with has heard you and you have heard them, not necessarily that you are in agreement. I have a friend who's a public speaker too, and he taught me this line once, and I have stolen it mercilessly ever since, or unmercilessly ever since, where if I'm the only one you have heard saying this, I need to be okay with that. And what that's really getting at is, once again, going on the idea of what is success. Perhaps success in a conversation is you may be the one time that somebody has heard what you're trying to say, has heard the opposing view of what you are saying, of what they are saying. We have to be comfortable that possibly we are just planting seeds and we don't know when they're going to grow. We don't know when somebody's going to accept them, but you're just putting it out there. So once again, it's not on you to make people see. What's all we can really do at the end of the day is share our ideas and experiences and hope that possibly people will see what we're talking about. But that's a lot of responsibility if we've got to change the world every time we speak at that moment. So once again, perhaps success is that you are making the other person stop and think about what they are thinking, what their values and thoughts are. Not necessarily they have to buy what you're selling there. And I think oftentimes why we don't enter into these conversations is we're scared or nervous about people disagreeing with us or not liking us for stating our opinion. And a friend of mine, his name is Eric. Eric told me a story. Eric is a filmmaker. He made a movie where he interviewed powerful people about advice they have for the younger generation. And Eric liked to talk to people and he liked to tell stories. So one time he was telling me that he was on an airplane with 10-time Olympic gold medal winner Carl Lewis from the 80s. And he was sitting next to Carl Lewis and they were talking for about a half hour. And he said to Carl Lewis, "Hey, what is it like to be you?" And Carl Lewis said, "Eric, this is what it's like to be me. There's a person 2 rows in front of us who's seen us talking for a half hour. And that person might be saying to themselves, you know what? I liked Carl Lewis when he was winning Olympic gold medals. And look at him taking time out of his flight to talk to this person nobody knows. I liked him then, and I really like him now." But there's a person a row in front of him saying, "God, Carl Lewis, I thought he was a little arrogant winning 10 gold medals. And look at him just talking about himself nonstop to that poor guy who has to sit next to him. I didn't like him then, and I really don't like him now." But then Carl Lewis said, in front of him, Eric, is somebody who's saying, who the hell is Carl Lewis? And so it's really the ratios that I think the lesson of that story is. A third of the people are going to agree with you and like what you're saying. A third of the people are going to disagree and not like what you're saying. And a third of the people aren't really listening and don't really care about what you're saying. So if the ratios are the same, regardless of what you're saying, why not speak up then and realize a third are going to like it, a third aren't going to like it, and a third aren't going to listen. So you may as well go ahead and speak your piece. And it's just these conversations. Once again, I want to take some pressure off that it's just basic conversations that have to happen. Once again, we often think it's got to be high level conversations. They're going to create change. I want to share a story with you, and I'll wrap up and love to take questions and comments and enter into uncomfortable conversations about all this. Right after George Floyd's murder, that weekend, some cities most cities, protests happened. In some cities, riots happened. Atlanta had both. And that Friday night, downtown Atlanta, the downtown Atlanta was erupted in riots. And that Sunday, so the Sunday following George Floyd's murder, I was sitting at home and I needed some inspiration, some connection. And I went where I usually go. I went to the King Center, where Dr. King is buried with his wife, Coretta Scott King. And I was just sitting there by his tomb, and a black man came and sat near me. And it being the South, we just acknowledged each other. And then he asked me, he said, "Are you here because of the news of the day?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So how are you doing?" And I said, "Not good. What's going on is not good, and I'm not feeling good about our country. How are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm scared for my nephews and nieces about what's going on, being a black man." And we sat in silence some. I just looked at him and said, "I'm just so sorry." And he said, "Why? You haven't done anything." I said, "I know, but I'm sorry that we live in a country where we are where we are right now with this." We sat in some more silence. And then he looked at me and said, "Do you think it's ever going to change? Do you think blacks and whites are ever going to get along?" And I said, "I don't know. I really don't know. But why can't that be our narrative that we do? Why do we have to buy the narrative that we don't? Why can't we move forward that we do get along?" And we sat there some more in silence, and he just looked at me. He goes, "Well, maybe this is how we start." I said, "I sure hope so." And I got up to tell him goodbye. And it being the South, he did something that's very common down here. He said, "Can I pray for us?" And I said, "Sure." So we got up and stood next to each other, and he prayed for us. And I got to tell you, I'm not a very religious person. That was a pretty religious moment for me, a pretty spiritual moment, sitting there with this man named Jack, and praying for ourselves and our country. And then we moved on. So I came home and I posted that on Facebook. And I get that social media can be trite and Facebook can be trite, but Facebook is how a large chunk of this country does talk to each other and share stories. And that story sort of blew up. Over 1,000 people liked it. I didn't even know I knew 1,000 people. And then it got shared like 300 times, and I got called and messaged, "These are the conversations we need to have. I want to have this conversation. How can I have this?" And I said, "You know what? Look at the conversation. Nothing really happened. There was nothing programmed." I think we, and in our community especially, think that we have to there is no problem we can't program for. And part of it is maybe we think too much. That conversation, which moves so many people, was such a basic conversation. But what it did was we were just vulnerable to each other and connected on a very human level. Each of us went from an other to another to each other. I was just another person thinking about what was happening in the world around us. And he became another person affected by this, not the other anymore. And when somebody goes from the other to another, we humanize them. And there's a bumper sticker we have on our summer trip bus that says, "When you can see yourself in the other, then whom can you harm?" And that's really what it's all about, is making those connections. And I want to wrap up with this. But that point, by the way, was just basic conversations are what's going to move us. But Dr. King, at the end of his life in 67, before he was murdered in 68 in Memphis, he gave a speech at Cornell University. And in his speech, he said the following: people hate each other because they fear each other. And they fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because we can't communicate with each other. And we can't communicate with each other because we're separated from each other. About a month and a half ago, we celebrated Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and started the year 5781, right? 5781, got the math right. And programmatically, we started a new year. If you have children or grandchildren, they just started up school. And we're about to celebrate 2021. We're about to be done with 2020, to the happiness of a lot of people. And I just want to say a prayer for us that may this be the year that, yes, during COVID, we are separated from each other. I got to say, though, the bright spot of COVID is I get to sit here and be with y'all. Otherwise, this never would have happened. But we are separated from each other because of COVID. But may this be the year that we break down the physical barriers that we created that separate us from each other and realize there's a lot more that we have in common than we don't. And that's what happens when you start talking to people who don't look like you, think like you, pray like you, love like you, vote like you. And so may this be the year that we start doing that. And with that, first of all, I want to thank you for letting me spend a Sunday afternoon with y'all out there in California. And I'm more than happy to take questions, comments, pushback. I work with teenagers. I'm always comfortable being told I'm wrong. So please, however you want to do it, but just raise your hand. I guess there's not that many of us that we can just, and then unmute yourself.
I think that maybe the best way to do that would just be to digitally raise your hand if you are, unless you're on the phone, in which case just unmute yourself.
Any comments, questions, or pushback? Sandy Anderson, let me see, where are you? There you are up there.
I think the examples that you state of meeting a person of another race is a much easier conversation than, because you might have issues in common, but we keep saying, how could 70 million people vote for Trump? And I think those are the conversations that seem the most futile to most of us. And if you had any strategies,
right,
there.
Yeah, clearly, look, the election was probably frustrating for everybody. I don't know of a single segment of the country that probably walked away from there satisfied. If you're a Democrat or progressive, you're in shock, because in all actuality, you did the big job. You did task number one. You took the White House back, but you lost seats in the House, and who knows? Maybe Georgia's going to flip and you're going to get the Senate. I would not be placing that bet on Georgia. I wouldn't put that much pressure on us. We just flipped blue. I mean, now we have to flip both seats. But what I'm getting at is, so there was no repudiation of Trumpism if you're on the left, right? On the right, you didn't win the White House. And if you're into politics, you realize the Republican Party is now split. You have Trumpism and you have traditional Republican Party, the Lincoln Project Republican Party people. They're probably the ones least happy because they can't redo their party now. Their party is stuck still with Trumpism. So I don't know of anybody who walked away. But Sandy, I would say this: you are spot on that it's a harder conversation, but that makes it all the more important, because the reality is we're still one country. We have to live here with each other. Nobody's going away. And so my mental steps to you are, because this is always the number one question. I want to see if y'all come up with the number two question that's going to come up. But number one is, basically what your question is implying too is these are values, and these are, politics does come down to values, and they are disagreeing with what you find to be fundamentally human values. fundamental human values, right? You know, Jim pushing back against marriage equality is saying members of the LGBT plus community are not equal, right? And that's a hard thing because he's pushing back there. But what I want to keep emphasizing is, to you he is wronged. To him he's not, you know? And I get that in my core I disagree with Jim. In to the core of who I am, Jim is wrong. And what he promotes, I think, is wrong. But in a democracy that has freedom of speech and thought, I have to understand that I am wrong to him. I am right to me, but I'm wrong to him. And so you've got to allow for that. It doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean you don't have to push back and spend the rest of your life pushing back. But every once in a while, when I start to really get frustrated, that's the voice I hear in my head going, to me, he's wrong. And I think he is. I think it is, I use this word a lot, is fundamentally wrong, his views, or somebody who views something else. But I do have to allow that he understands it differently than I do. And perhaps in my more Aaron Sorkin West Wing poetic way, I like to think that, you know what, we're both trying to make the world better. We just view it very differently. That doesn't work long for me. I'm not saying that, but you know, you gotta believe that we're not in a monolithic one size fits all view of the country. And so all the more you need to fight harder for what you think, because there are Jims out there. You know, your side of the argument has others on there, so you gotta fight for it. I mean, this is something we teach the teens and the adults who come on our civil rights trip. Looking around the streets, everybody has the power to vote here, you know. And so therefore you need to keep the discussions going. You know, there's the phrase, I think it was Dr. King who said, the person who resorts to violence first is going to lose. So you got to keep talking to each other, right? Where did Julie Bell? Yes.
Hi, Billy.
Hey.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
I grew up in Little Rock, and my mom is actually the principal at Little Rock Central High School. So, like,
we go there every year.
With all of that. You probably know my mom then. But to me, I mean, I want to agree with Sandy that to me, there's so much work to do on the race issue, but I just feel like it's more surmountable because we have values in common. And right now I'm struggling because I have an uncle and I have a dad who are not politically aligned. I'm not politically aligned with them. And I don't even know what do I start with? Like, I understand what you're saying, and maybe it's easier to talk to Jim, who you don't care about and you don't want to have.
Right.
I want to love my dad,
right,
and I want to love my uncle, but I don't even know where to start because I'm so frustrated.
Okay. Well, so Julie, you won the contest there. That is always the second question, which is what about when it's family? And so first of all, Julie, Little Rock is way funkier than I ever thought it was going to be as a city. Those of you who've never been there, you should try getting down there. It's a good town. And so with family, first of all, I just want to go through a few things here. One is, think about family for a second. It is one of the things that we don't get to choose them, and yet we're expected to have this relationship and concern and love for. You know, that's really in a basic level, that's a really weird concept. You know, we pick our friends based on mutual things, so it makes sense that we have this relationship. So sometimes right near Little Rock in Tupelo, Mississippi, is a singer-songwriter that I like. His name is Paul Thorne. And he has a song where the title of the song is, I Don't Like Half the People I Love. And so, you know, it's really, you have to come to some understanding of, I can love my family members, but there was no guarantee that I'm going to agree with them. It's not like when we surround ourselves with our friends who think like we do. So this is going to happen in families. And look, I'm getting it. I am to the left of center, and I'm getting it from the far left. I have a transgender nephew who is beyond woke. I mean, and I'm the enemy to him. I am a comfortable white male with privilege. It's cisgender. I am happy being a straight male, as my nephew has told me. And so we go at it as if we were on opposite sides here, because I'm not activistic enough, or liberal or open-minded or woke enough to left. And so I have to realize when we go to my parents' house that sometimes Friday night dinner is just Friday night dinner. I don't need to solve the world's problems over Friday night dinner. That's not to say that there aren't times where my nephew will say something that I don't push back on. Now, all of us around the table are center left, so there's really not there's not the voice from the other side. But there are moments where I start to where I'm going to start in with my nephew, and then I'm like, you know what? Maybe a gift to my parents is the concept of shalom bayit, of just allowing the dinner to happen in their house so they can be with their children and grandchildren. And by the way, I know good and well my parents are going to side with their grandchildren over their children any day. But I don't mean to belittle your point at all, because it's maddening, because it's family, and you sort of assume there's going to be a like vibe coming through the whole thing, but stop to realize none of y'all chose to be there. And so why would it necessarily happen that you would all agree there? And so that's when I start to find out, can I at least go back to dropping the seeds thing? Can I at least just say to my uncle, maybe, you know what? I've heard you, but I just want to explain to you, there is another view of this. And that might be as good as it's going to get, is that they can't walk away thinking everybody thinks like they do. And you just got to keep saying it over and over. You know, if anybody's into psychology, the neural pathways, you know, why is it so hard to change a habit? Because you're walking a new path. So you just got to keep saying a new way of thinking over and over and over. And it might be the 80th time you say it where they're like, oh my God, okay, I get it. But please understand, more than likely, they're never going to get it. But they can never walk away going, wow, somebody else thinks a different way. Everybody thinks like I do. They can never say nobody thinks opposite. And so sometimes that has to be success. And that's why I was getting at is, and this is also some of what Sandy, to Sandy's point too, is that I'm not saying you're going to win every argument. In the classic definition of winning the argument is somebody changes their mind. It just may be that you just stand up for what you believe, and that's going to be it. That's going to be as good as it's going to get. And you know what? That might not be where your work is. And I know you got to retort. I'm going to say one more thing and then hear what you got to say. Like my parents are center left. They're 85 years old. I will hear from them every time they come home from synagogue or off the synagogue Zoom call. Can you believe the Schwartzes said this? They're Trump people and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can believe it because you say this every week. What I can't believe is you get offended by it every week, that you are frustrated by them every week. That's the part I don't understand. I get the Schwartzes are there. So at some point I said to my dad, you get so frustrated and angry, Dad, but I got to tell you, at some point, this is on you. The Schwartzes are exactly who the Schwartzes are. You know, I think it's the Maya Angelou line. When somebody presents themselves to you, believe who they are. But I do believe in tshuva. I do believe people can repent. How arrogant of me to think that repentance is viewing the world as I do, by the way, right? It's not necessarily that way. But I tell my dad, this is on you now. If you're going to engage with the Schwartzes and you walk away frustrated, that's your doing. And clearly, because I have a degree in psychology, I'm like, I think my dad needs something from this. He's getting something from these talks. But, so sometimes with my friends, I choose not to engage because I'm like, you know what? Like today, I'm curious about what Jim thinks about President Trump not conceding the election. Now, if I were in Las Vegas, I'd bet a lot of money that Jim would tell me the same lines I've heard come from the White House as to why he's not. Because Jim he drinks the Kool-Aid. He backs them. But I'm curious. But then also, I knew that today I was meeting a friend for a long walk, and then I was getting to talk to y'all. It's a good day. It's going to be a really good day. So did I really want to ruin my day by engaging in that and getting frustrated by that conversation? I'm going to live to fight another day, you know? So sometimes it's that. I choose my battles here, and you got to do some self-care. And that's hard with family, but really it comes down to you walking out of the house too.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Is it better just to not engage? Because when I think about the fact that we're really not sharing values,
Right.
it not only makes me mad, I mean, I don't understand, but it makes me sad because I feel like it's the values piece of the puzzle that is so important to all of us. And that's why
Right.
we're having such a hard time with the political conversations, because we feel like on the right and the left, we have completely different values right now.
Right.
And so I just wonder if what you're saying is like, love them and just don't even try, because it seems kind
No,
of pointless.
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is I think you will know when it's time to do it, when it's not. And what the point I was trying to make that I never made with my dad's part is this. I told my dad, I was like, perhaps your energy would be better used if your goal is to get President Trump out of office. This is before the election. Perhaps your goal is not to talk to the Schwartzes because they're going to vote for him. Perhaps your goal is talk to people who think like you who might not go vote. Maybe that's what you need to do. You said and I've said this to my dad, you said your piece to the Schwartzes. They've heard you, and you said it twice. You know, in advertising, they say it's 3 hits of advertising that gets somebody to change their mind or sticks with them. So I follow that. I'll say it 2 or 3 times. And then after that, I'm like, how is my time better used? You know, what's the best use? And so in your particular situation, I will say to people who bring up the same issue, I'll be like, we've had this conversation. You know, I don't agree with you, right? And they're like, yeah. I was like, okay, I just want to make sure you know that. Feel free to bring this up, but my mind hasn't changed and yours hasn't either. And I'm willing not to talk about this, but if you want to go there, we can go there. Yep. Marilyn Morris.
Yeah.
And then I think I can. Yep. Where are
Yeah.
you, Marilyn?
I'm here. Wait.
I know you're there. I got to find you on my screen. There you are. Okay.
So I just wanted to follow up on one thing that's the conversation I think is kind of veered away from, that you started off saying how important it is to understand people. And I know I know Sandy really well. We're very good friends, and Julie too. And it's one thing about family that's a little different, but I think it's wrong of us to project. We here in Northern California, living in our very wonderful, beautiful area, and we're all doing quite well and that sort of thing. It's not correct for us to project that all of those 70 million people who voted for Trump did so because of and ignore the offense or, discount or whatever it is, the things that we find so offensive, the values that, we reject so much. We don't really know how or why or what motivated them. And to me, that gets back to your initial statement, which is we need to understand it a little better, which is, there are millions of people in the Midwest who maybe are farmers, and I don't know about that. And, there may be a very legitimate reason why whatever the Trump administration has done for them, or they perceive it to be done, was more important to them than what I think was important. And so that's the only comment I wanted to make, that in in our perception of what went quote
Yeah.
unquote wrong in the election is this mystery for all of us. Well, how could 70 million people vote for that man that is so
Right.
despicable and all of that? And I think, you know, like sort of to your point, I've been a, you know, my family were Democrats. I've been a Democrat. I live in Northern California. You know, I'm as blue as we can all be. I don't know that I could vote Republican ever. I mean, I say that as a confession. And so I think there are a lot of people that maybe in the United States of America, maybe as many as 70 million, for all we know, who voted Republican, even though they might despise and find certain amount of disgust with the presidential candidate, but it's ingrained in them and they're just not ready to kind of move to a different sense of identity.
Yeah.
And so just to get back to your point about how important it is, we don't really know or understand what motivated the people who did what they did to vote the way they do. We don't know whether poverty or healthcare, you know, or whatever it is, we just don't know. And I think that's kind of a important issue not to overlook.
Completely. Nor do they understand why we voted for, you know, in their minds, a socialist, whatever. It is really important. And by the way, you do have a large number that clearly split their ticket. You know, might not have voted for president Republican, but voted down ballot Republican, and the other way too. I think it's really important because the other point I wanted to make about the election is what it's clearly showed us is I think America is to the center. I think most Americans are in the center. And I think your point, Marilyn, is brilliant, your opening point. And that's what we all need to understand is where are we coming from? I don't think I need to tell y'all. I mean, y'all live in a really nice, if you're to the center left progressive, you're in a great place. But, you know, after the 2016 election, I was leading a civil rights trip to Memphis, Tennessee, and it was for an Upper East Side synagogue in New York City. But I mean, just think Berkeley. Think if I brought a synagogue from Berkeley. And they said to me when they found out I was from Atlanta, they're like, how can you be down here? How can you be around? I'm walking down these streets and I'm thinking some of these people voted for Trump. And I looked at them, I said, I would tell you most of them voted for Trump. I was like, he won. I was like, and you're in Tennessee. I was like, but you know, my advice to them was, y'all need to get out of the Upper East Side. I was like, how am I dealing? How am I not catatonic after the 2016 election, which they completely look like they were? Is I knew my neighbors voted for Trump. I mean, down here in Georgia, even though we just went blue, clearly we have a split state here. And so that's once again why I'm talking about talking to people who are on the other side philosophically than you. And one of the things I want to share this other story. My best friend from camp, her name is Eliza, and she is the quintessential Boston Jewish woman, liberal social worker. But her husband is a Republican political consultant, but he's pretty moderate. And then I was talking to him in August, and I said, John, his name is John. I was like, John, are you working on any campaigns? He said, well, actually, down by you, I'm running a senator's campaign, Kelly Loeffler, who's one of the Republicans running for Senate down here. Then he quickly said, he goes, but you're probably voting for the black man because he's black. And I said, well, you're talking about Reverend Raphael Warnock. He's like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, I'm voting for him because I think he's a tremendous man. I've heard him speak. I take my groups to his church on our civil rights trips, and he and I agree on a lot. And then I was talking to Eliza later, and I said, Eliza, you know, that was a weird conversation I had with John, probably the most aggressive I've ever heard him, or stray from center further down right. And in the middle of that sentence, something occurred to me. I was like, Eliza, John is from Minneapolis. She's like, yeah. I was like, did anything happen to him or his family in the riots in Minneapolis? She said, funny you should ask that, but his family business, 4 generations burned to the ground, it's done. I was like, I get why he has some anger. I don't agree with it. And once again, this is a really hard concept in America right now. Just because I can acknowledge it and understand does not mean I condone it. But I can see why John is coming where John came from to get this idea. But I will still fight against him on this. And when he and I talk again, we will. But by the way, I look at John, he can't understand why I'm voting for Raphael Warnock. I can't understand how he's working for Kelly Loeffler, right? But I'm not willing to throw away everything on that. We just fundamentally disagree. And I'm working my hardest to get his candidate to lose at the expense of Eliza not getting the new car this year if they lose. So, you know, I mean, this is what it comes down to, but it's, can we not allow his political affiliation, who he backs? And I think personally, Kelly Loeffler represents so much I don't like. But is that John in totality? Or can I just focus on the compartmentalized John? And I like the fact that he's married to my best friend and he takes care of her. So I'll talk to him about that. And I happen to be a Minnesota Vikings fan, football fan. So we'll talk about that. But we don't necessarily, we'll talk about politics every once in a while, but we both have to be in the mood to argue and debate. And then we'll talk about the Vikings again. So I think it's really important to understand, A, to come out of the Bay Area. Yeah, the rest of the country doesn't operate like that. Most of the country thinks y'all are insane. I'm sure y'all have heard it all. But, you know, I think hopefully, though realistically it never happens, the calling of this election is that both sides, the fringes, aren't necessarily where we need to focus. The middle is where most of us are. And I got to tell you, this is going to become very interesting in Atlanta, in Georgia, as we are getting flooded now by Northeasterners coming down here to help out in the campaign. What AOC talks about in Brooklyn does not work. And I live in probably the bluest neighborhood of a blue city and now a blue state. My analogy is now blown. I used to say the bluest neighborhood in a blue city in a very red state, but AOC wouldn't even make it in my neighborhood. So we need to realize AOC represents Brooklyn. Your congressional leader does not come anywhere near what would work in Georgia. So we need to appreciate what works. Doug Jones, the senator from Alabama, who beat Roy Moore back in 2017, but then just lost to Tommy Tuberville. First of all, the people who are making fun of the fact that how could this guy win who doesn't know the three branches of government? You don't understand the Southeast. He's a football coach, first of all. Of course he was going to win. He's a Republican. Of course he was going to win in Alabama. He's not a pedophile. Of course he was going to win in Alabama. When Roy Moore lost, my groups from the Northeast were like, how could he almost win? Aren't you shocked that he almost won? I'm like, no, we're shocked he didn't win. If they had just run somebody without the complete stench of pedophilia, he would have won. And I don't mean that as a joke. He would have won at that point. So we got to understand where we are, where the country is. And it's not all Berkeley and it's not all Cambridge, Massachusetts. And some of it is Cheyenne, Wyoming. Some of it is outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. And parts of it are not far from here, Georgia, you know, and some of it is a beautiful mix there. I got asked online, what are things to do to help Reverend Warnock and Ossoff? Online here, I got in chat, I got asked this. So I know, first of all, of course, you can donate. But also I know that there's phone banking that can be done from remote areas as well. But you can also talk to people. I mean, the reality is it's going to come down to votes. I mean, Fair Fight, the organization Fair Fight, their offices are literally across the street. A good friend of mine runs that organization with Stacey Abrams. I mean, they're getting money like you wouldn't believe, but that doesn't get you votes. So it's all going to come down to voting at some point. And so we need we need people to vote and be aware. So, you know, I'll do this. I'll leave you with this too, the power of communications and connection. When, with marriage equality, we meet with a man named Evan Wolfson, nice Jewish lawyer who runs the organization Freedom to Marry. He basically ran the organization that really got through the Supreme Court case in 2015. And his whole thing was he wrote a thesis while in law school that said we need to change the hearts and minds of America before the Supreme Court will vote in our way. And one thing that he taught me was back in the day, Harvey Milk from your area, his philosophy was anybody who is gay must come out. Because once you know somebody who's gay, can you hate them? If your uncle comes out, your aunt, whatever it is, cousin, father, mother, whatever it is, neighbor. Evan said, that's not necessarily true. That's not the most effective thing. What they found to be the most effective thing is just talking to somebody. And that person did not have to be a member of the LGBT community. It just had to be somebody that that was pro marriage equality. And if you just talk to somebody, you can start to change the hearts and minds. That's how powerful connection is. And so once again, you are as scary to the hardcore Trump voter as they are to you. And I think it's really important that we understand that. And I don't think I'm that scary. So all of a sudden, maybe they're not that scary. Maybe we just need to know each other. Not be best friends, not really ever agree that much. Just realize we're all in this together. I don't know. That's just what I think. I could be wrong, but I just wanted to throw that idea out there to you. So I can send the rabbi the link to the volunteer and phone banking, but you can also Google it. But you can volunteer and phone bank from the Bay Area. You don't have to be. I mean, it's the amazing part. This is one of the silver linings of COVID is we've learned how much even more connected we are to each other. So there's work. If that's what you want to do, I'll be honest, to talk the talk. If you want to back Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, I'm sure you can do it also from there as well. So, yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I think Cynthia Goldberg had one.
Yeah, sure.
Hi there.
Cynthia.
First,
Hey,
thank
how are you?
for opening this up. I'm one of the folks from the synagogue, Beit Haverim in Davis, and a friend of Roy's. And I, like Julie, I grew up with a dad who was very conservative Republican, Northeast New England Jew, but very conservative. And I think that one of the things that, Billy, that you're saying about the middle is incredibly important, because I think particularly for those of us who have lots of family members who don't agree with us. I grew up in a family where nobody agreed. And that was my assumption. And I have an adult daughter who said to me, Mom, I don't see things the same way you do. I don't think that this and that are the right things. I'm like, okay, so what? Like, good. You made up your own mind. I'm glad for that. And I think that most people are in the middle, and we're not giving voice to the middle, and because we're not listening and we're not asking those questions. And I think that, my frustration in this past couple of weeks has been that, well, maybe the past few years, is that the Republicans in the Congress have really not spoken up when they are unlikely to be 100% in favor of what the White House is doing, because they see it as an all or none thing. Like either they throw their lot in with Trump and his cronies, or they don't. And in the same way that my dad and I didn't agree on everything, he was a very economically conservative guy. He loved Reagan. He thought Nixon was great. He had a lot of great things to say about them. I did not. But socially, he was very liberal, and he was very egalitarian. And, I understood that difference for a long time. And I think that that's probably true of many other people. Certainly, I'd like to encourage people in Congress to voice the fact that they might agree with Trump on one thing, but they don't agree on these other things, and really listen to each other. And that would encourage them to speak out. And having lived in the Midwest, in the Atlantic states, and in New England, and now in California. I will also say California is not monolithic either.
No.
I have friends and family that are in this area in Northern California that voted for Trump, and think that he's like economically amazing because the economy is doing really well. And why would you vote that person out? And there are places in California, many places outside of the Bay Area and LA that are very, very conservative. They just are not the majority.
Right.
They're not replacing Pelosi and Feinstein and Newsom. So I think if we don't start listening to each other and we don't start paying attention to the middle, then we end up with this very divided, all or nothing, pendulum swinging one way or the other sort of life ahead of us. And that sounds really bad to me because, yeah, Biden might undo every presidential decree that Trump made. And then whoever comes after him in the next or the next or the next election will undo that. And that's incredibly unstable. And that seems really bad. So I think that what you're saying about uncomfortable conversations is really, for me, I take as an encouragement to listen to those people who voted one way or the other and get them to understand that even if they're a Trump Republican, that there are some things they probably don't agree with Trump on. And even if they're a Biden Democrat or a Sanders Democrat, if they're a Bernie fan, there are probably some things they don't agree with Bernie on so that they can be more discerning in those arguments. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say as I really look forward to this. I'm really appreciative of your encouragement of us to reach out and ask questions and talk to people and figure out that we might not like anything about them but their shoes, but at least we like one thing.
Right. Thank you. And you're right. No politician is going to be perfect, and that's something we try and teach the young people. Is sometimes you don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, and that
and our parents aren't going to be perfect, and our children
Right.
and our in-laws, and the
Right.
people that we hang out with or work with.
So spot on. In the chat room, I posted this link is to a Google Doc that will tell you the most updated things you can do for Georgia and the Senate race. There are things that only locals can do, but clearly there'll be things that you can do from outside of Georgia. And you got my email and website there. But yeah, I think just reaching across. And by the way, to progressives, I mean, it's a scary future if you want to think about it. The teens who come on my trip who are conservative, right, Republican, the social issues are not going to be the gap anymore, the divide anymore. They have no problem with marriage equality. They are against racism. Some of them are pro-choice. Some of them are pro-gun control. So those gaps that that the parties have really found places to situate in are closing some. It's really going to come down to physical issues. And for the Jewish community, it's going to be Israel that divides the two on issues like that. So we're going to have to figure, if you're to the left, you're going to have to reconfigure your message. And what are we doing? And that's going to be the internal battle, by the way, for both parties, is how far to the sides do you go versus the middle? And that, I mean, it's not even the uncomfortable conversation going Democrat to Republican. It's going to be within the parties as well, that the uncomfortable conversation is going to happen. The Bernie people versus, the Joe Biden people, or whoever is going to be popping up in the in 2024 or 28 or the future. So just keep talking to each other, and go easy on yourself and on others. I think that's really important things to do. Anybody else?
Marcia?
Hey,
Marcia, you need to unmute.
Marcia, you're not unmuted. There you go.
There, I'm sorry. I said I wanted to thank you so much. I thought you did an incredible presentation. Years ago, I lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was very active in B'nai B'rith. I was president. And one of the programs I was most interested in is Dolls for Democracy, which was under the auspices of B'nai B'rith and the Anti-Defamation League. And we used to take all these dolls that have very different features and colors into the schools and do the same type of talk that you're doing. And I think when you say the teenagers today that the gap is closing, kids that were sitting in that room started to understand that the skin color and the culture and the foods, food is a big thing with different cultures. It narrows the gap, and having conversations was so worthwhile. I have no idea what happened to Dolls for Democracy, but it was a very good vehicle to reach youth, and the youth are our future. So thank you so much for pointing that out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Pennsylvania, fascinating. You know, as they say, you got Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and a lot of Alabama in between. So that state has got the range too. But when we come up the coast in California, you know, it becomes really clear. The food country, the farmer part of your country, you know, we on the East think, oh, it's liberal California. Not at all. I mean, and it used to just be, you'd have Orange County around LA too, would show you that it was different. And by the way, the Bay Area, one of the favorite stops of the kids on the trip. They love it. I'm not going to kid you. It might have to be because it's one of the first cities we get to with whose temperature is not in triple digits during the summer, but they love your town. They do. It's good stuff. So I want to thank the rabbis for bringing me out, unless I'm missing somebody here that wants to say something. But I know we're getting on in time. So I just want to thank y'all so much for letting me come and be a part of your community. You know, and clearly y'all are you find the work in building a beloved community, or in Judaism, as we call it, Kehillah Kedoshah, a holy community. But the work of Dr. King, the work of the rabbis as well. So I want to thank you for letting me come in to be a part of your community today. I really, really enjoyed being here with y'all, and best of luck with as we move forward together here.
Thank you, Billy. Wonderful to have you here. And please, everyone, join us next week at 11:30, Sunday, 11:30. Conversation's not done, no matter how comfortable or uncomfortable we might be. We'll explore sort of the history of Black and Jewish communities in America. So thank you, Billy. Really wonderful to have you here.
Next week. Right. That's great. I look forward to it. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.